This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, critical look at Canada's role abroad. I'm Eve Engler. Weekly look at Canadian foreign policy. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And hope everyone's doing well. I'll get right to it because I'm running a bit late here. Owen Schock has a piece on Canadian Dimension that quotes from his own book about Canada's role in Afghanistan. And there's a piece of information I think is interesting. He says that in his research for his book on Canada's role in Afghanistan, he found that military and government officials made up almost 47% of all, 40% of all primary sources in Canadian newspapers discussing Afghanistan, and they were the most cited secondary sources. Canada's media was 11 times more likely to quote a Canadian official than an Afghan official or civilian, and 158 times more likely to quote Canadian official than an anti-war advocate. And then he concludes Ottawa's carefully crafted narrative about the occupation thus dominated its public perception in Canada. Uh, that's a pretty stark contrast, 158 times to quote a government official than a anti-war advocate. It obviously goes with what we would expect it. In this article in Canadian Dimension, um, he links to a story that I'd missed from last year, or I guess 2023, year and a half ago or something, from CBC about an official history that was commissioned by Leslie, who was the former chief of defense staff, who became a liberal. I'm totally forgetting his blanking his name. Leslie, what's his? He becomes a liberal MP, and I think he has a cabinet position for a while. Andrew Leslie, is that right? Uh, and when he's chief of defense staff, he commissions a official history. Sean Maloney, this former Royal Military, I think he might still be Royal Military College professor. I've read a few of his books. He's very hardline militarist, but he's actually quite an honest academic. Very good book about Canadian gunboat diplomacy, Sean Maloney. But he's a serious militarist, serious empire supporter, whatever. And basically, the CBC story talks about how it took like more than a decade for this official history to be published, and they only publish 800 copies because it becomes so controversial internally within the military structure. And I talk about that in my propaganda system about a previous official history commissioned by the Department of National Defense's History Department, or actually produced by History Department, and that the at one point the cabinet actually discusses this history. I forget what war it was even now, World War II, World War One, and they like demand changes, and just the degree of control over the writing of Canadian military history and the sort of politicization within the D&D's history department. And as I talk about in the propaganda system book, until like the late 60s, almost all of Canadian military history that was published was coming out of the official history department of the DND. Now, in more recent years, there's many more academics that have a greater degree of independence that have written histories of different Canadian wars and stuff like that. But the military's influence early on, and how many of the big military historians that actually begin in the Canadian military's history department, which has like, as of years ago when I did the research for that, was like 50 different full-time staff. So bigger than a history department in most universities. That so many of the historians became well known in writing Canadian military history. They all begin in the history department of the Department of National Defense. It's just one little element in the sort of how perception of Canada's role in the world and the military is influenced by these propaganda structures that obviously the official history department of the military is a clear example of that. Anthony Fenton on his Twitter account, he talks about this mining forum in Saudi Arabia. And he says that more than 70 Canadian companies attended a major mining conference in Saudi Arabia last week, and no one seems to care. And so the kind of deepening ties of Canada, Saudi Arabia is really picking up. And there was a Canadian pavilion, probably sponsored by uh, the embassy, Export Development Canada, maybe, where they bring together all these different Canadian mining companies there, who I guess either have operations in Saudi Arabia or are looking to get operations in Saudi Arabia. The National Post on the front page a couple days ago had a piece titled "Canadian Reprieve for Alleged Haiti Coup Plotter." And my initial reaction was this, Haiti alleged coup plotter. I'm like, oh, is some Canadian connection, Canadian official is going to be pursued for their role in overthrowing the elected government in Haiti in 2004 or something like that. It seemed very exciting. In fact, what it was is a guy, a Haitian, who in 1989 was part of a division of the military in Haiti, the Léopard, that was involved in a coup against a Avril, the leader, who was also a military person, but it was viewed as the Léopard was like a more reactionary element of the Haitian military than the leader. And basically, this guy's being accused of having been involved in this coup, and he denied. He said, "I was part of the unit, but I didn't have anything to do with the coup." Um, it brings up some qu interesting questions about immigration. It seems pretty excessive to me to be blocking somebody 35 years later on the grounds that he was part of the Haitian military, even if he was in some way knowledgeable about this. No one's claiming he was a top official or anything, just a simple soldier. It seems a little bit extreme to be blocking him from staying in Canada on those grounds 35 years later. Uh, and the sort of hypocrisy of all this of we're gonna be aggressive against some low level military person in Haiti from 35 years ago, but we have no problem with Paul Martin wandering around or the minister. Uh, I'm blanking on his name right now. The Francophonie minister who was responsible for the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti to plot the coup against Aristide in 2003. Nonetheless, that's the power dynamics of the world. There's a story that I came across. It's actually from mid-December. It's a big report by PAX NGO, and it's like a three-year investigation that they did on Barra Gold's Kabali mine in the Congo, Africa's largest gold mine, they say, and the displacement that this mine caused. I think it's 2,500 people were displaced. A whole kind of community was basically um, bulldozed for the mine, and the company. The report goes into the company claims this that, oh, in fact these were all illegal squatters, and but then they go back and forth, and they did this big extensive investigation. It seems pretty clear that there was a pretty unfair process to drive out a whole bunch of people. Um, this is just one of an endless stream of examples of barracks operations all around the world, causing all kinds of different human rights, ecological. There's a piece on TRT, the Turkish thing, on barrack in Mali, and it actually quotes Owen Schock, and it quotes myself, and it goes into a bit about just barracks operations globally and what's happening in Mali and the conflict. It really is. It is stunning how many examples of Barrick Gold operations causing conflict, and it's also really important, of course, to note, which is how powerful Barrick has been in Canadian foreign policy and how much backing it's received from Canadian diplomats, Canadian aid agency, and of course, part of that story is Peter Munk, the founder of Barrick Gold, and his role in things like the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, most important school of global affairs in the country, and that's part of the sort of power Barra Gold and the mining sector, I guess more generally, has had on Canadian foreign policy. Now, it looks like that the M23 Rwanda have taken control of parts or maybe all of Goma today in eastern Congo, and that's a big deal. That's a really terrible, terrible, terrible development. There's stories about huge numbers already, of course, hundreds and hundreds of thousands this year, let alone, I don't know what the exact number was, but I think somewhere around 1 million that had been displaced in the previous year and a half or so. But a couple 100,000 in the first 2 weeks of this year displaced in Eastern Congo. And almost certainly with today's developments, if this is correct, and it is not, there's counterclaims about they're just trying to scare people and cause panic and all that stuff. But this would probably lead to hundreds and hundred thousands more being displaced. And it's this is a 30-year history of violence and destabilization that Rwanda has caused. Now, yesterday, Global Affairs put out a statement, and not a word. This is Globe and Mail correspondent in South Africa, Jeffrey York. His post on tweet on X. Canada's latest statement, not a word about Rwanda's massive involvement in Eastern Congo, but merely a vague reference to foreign troops. This is how Rwanda escapes all consequences for invading its neighbor. And it's just one more example. Canada's totally on board with this. No problem, right? No problem with this incredible violence. We have, the Kigali, the aid money going into this child soldier project based in Kigali, while Rwanda is using child soldiers in Congo. And Global Affairs Canada employees saying we shouldn't be funding this. This is too embarrassing, too audacious, and government officials higher up superseding their suggestion. That was on the front page of the Globe Mail year and a half ago or something like that. They followed up a few months ago with more in that direction. So, and then of course, setting up diplomatic relations, setting up a full embassy in Kigali not long ago. Trudeau government did that. All the meetings between Trudeau and Kagame, while even after they've begun this latest phase of M23 violence in Eastern Congo. So Canada is this is a 30-year plus project, and horrible, horrible for Congolese, particularly in the east of the country. Where this is all going to go, it's unclear. But there's apparently most of the Rwandan military is on the border right now, and obviously they're already in Congo. There's how far along they'll go in this process of invading is really up to Washington, London, and Ottawa if we're going to put the brakes on Kigali's endless violence. And I'm going to get to this question of the Holocaust industry later on, but I guess kind of as a step towards that, the propaganda element and the of this whole thing and the whole simplistic account of the Rwandan genocide is a major Canadian contribution to enabling Kagame's crimes. They are still justifying their violence in Eastern Congo on the grounds of upending the Hutu forces that were responsible for the genocide. Now, of course, there's been many, many, many more times people killed in Eastern Congo than were killed in the 100 days of bloodletting in Rwanda in 1994. So even on that sort of level, it makes no sense, the justification, but it is still being put out there, and there's nothing, quite honestly, today. There's nothing progressive. There's nothing And what happened in Rwanda in '94 was really horrible. But to talk about the Rwandan genocide now is to basically enable Kagame's crimes, right? And I'll get to that with the Nazi Holocaust and how that plays out today, which there's a real parallel there. Um, in the case of the Nazi Holocaust, actually, what Hitler did and what the Nazis did was, they were responsible for the crime almost entirely. In the case of Rwanda, Kagame was actually responsible for a big chunk of the crime that he then uses to justify his further crimes in the Congo. Um, of course, they shot down the plane that spurred the mass killing, and most obviously, but many other elements, the invasion and more. Uh, just one second. What? Sorry. Um, and so it's a bad situation in Eastern Congo, and we should definitely be putting pressure on Ottawa to immediately condemn Rwanda's invasion and call for Rwanda to leave Congo. The Maple published a piece headlined "Who Will Win the Peace in Ukraine?" And it's a big, long, interesting piece from Peter McFarlane, who did the recent book about Christopher Freeland's grandfather, working with the Nazis and stuff. I haven't read the book. I've read a few reviews of it, and in the piece, he quotes a Ukrainian Institute of Politics, the head of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics, Ruslan Bortnik, who says, based in Kiev. For me, it's very strange that a country like Canada, with many nations, cultures, groups, ethnic groups, supported only a nationalistic vision in Ukraine. The role of Canada's development in Ukraine is huge, but sometimes this interest was very destructive because Canada supported a very right-wing nationalist Ukraine. It was something that was very destructive. Um, and this is not a new point, but this is an important point that doesn't get talked about much. Just how aggressive Canada's been in pushing a very simplistic idea of Ukrainian, and also how the been very supportive of undercutting minority language rights, uh, which has kind of passed without almost any comment in Quebec. Find that quite fascinating, right? Where there would be sort of a natural sense of sympathy for minority language rights. There should be in Quebec, but the whole geopolitics of everything trump any sense of that question. And what this piece further kind of confirms, and with what a post by Ivan Kauchinovsky today really confirms, is this is just a disaster for Ukraine, right? The military is on the cusp of collapsing, and so Kachinovsky says today that the head of the main, he's from the Pravda, Ukrainian Pravda, I believe. This is where he's getting this from. The head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, Kirill Budanov, told deputies about the threat to the existence of Ukraine if peace negotiations do not begin before the summer. So basically saying that Ukrainian military is they did this private briefing to members of the Parliament of Rada, and basically saying, hey, things are not, we can't sustain this. We're on the cusp of collapse, and there better be negotiations. Essentially, what this post is saying. And all these people who were the so-called pro-Ukrainians have just driven the country in this position that is turning out to be a total utter disaster. On Israel, so. Israel was supposed to pull out of southern Lebanon. They didn't do that, and they've now come up with some new ceasefire. A few more, they get a few more weeks. They refused. The Washington Post published a piece saying Israel has damaged or destroyed 800 plus buildings in Lebanon during the truce. Okay, 800. That's what the truce means for Israel. And and then you saw that they killed 22 Lebanese yesterday or the day before, trying to return to their homes. Um, the Lebanese military that Canada loves so much and has been working to support can't do anything to check Israeli power, of course. Now, in Gaza, we're seeing a situation that's now, I would say, becoming increasingly clear that it's really wonderful to see people's reaction, Palestinians' reaction, how happy they are to be able to return to their homes, even if the homes don't exist anymore, but at least to be able to move. And and we're seeing also a panic among the hardline Zionists in Israel and in Canada. So Ben Gvir in Hebrew tweeted yesterday or today the opening of the Netzarim highway this morning and the entry of tens of thousands of Gazans into the northern Gaza Strip are images of Hamas's victory and another humiliating part of the reckless deal. This is not what, quote, complete victory looks like. This is what complete surrender looks like. The heroic IDF soldiers did not fight and give their lives in the strip to make these images possible. We must return to war and destroy. So that's a minister with Netanyahu. And from my understanding, there's more and more of that, right? That basically the far right is seeing that this is Hamas still exists. They didn't ethnically cleanse Gaza. They didn't get their captives back by force, and so all of the major goals. I mean, they destroyed 90% of all houses. They obviously destroyed of and they killed huge number. What the final tally is, we don't know, but almost certainly it's over 100,000. And but they didn't succeed in their maximalist objectives. And also, it appears, and this is just getting it from Israeli commentator that seems sensible, that the basic public mood in Israel is we don't want to go back to this. There's the far right forces that are all panic about it, and they are angry, but that the overwhelming mood is that not that they have sympathy for Palestinians because they were very supportive of the genocide, but that it failed. They haven't succeeded, and it's you want to forget about this failure and move on with life. And it sort of became a kind of a they understand at some level it's a public relations disaster. And so the it always seemed that it was likely that the first phase of the ceasefire agreement would hold, but now there may be, I would say, growing sense, even with the crazy things that Donald Trump said, like clean out Gaza. But even with things like that from coming from Trump, that there's a growing sense that the public doesn't want this in Israel, and so Netanyahu is going to be is the pressure to stay the course is growing, and it looks like this may really be a ceasefire or at least a medium term, not just a 6 week endeavor. That seems to be growing, which obviously is a good thing. Now, in that context, Erwin Kotler Erwin Kotler, with his human rights, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we knew this guy was a total fraud already, but Erwin Kotler has a co-authored piece with another guy from his Raoul and Wallenberg Center in the National Post on Saturday. Big, long piece, maybe at least 1,500 words, maybe it's 2,000. And the headline is Don't Attach Strings to Rescuing Hostages. And the basic point in this is that all of the Israelis that were captives in Gaza should just have been released no matter what. And how dare the Canadian government have connected the release of Israelis in Gaza to stopping the Holocaust or stopping violence or anything. And he's actually come up with, I haven't had a chance to look into this, and I will, and if someone else has a chance to do this, he's come up with something called Bill C53, C 353, the Foreign Hostage Takers Accountability Act. And he's presenting it as some sort of endeavor, some sort of law that would force the Canadian government to uh, I don't know exactly what, but basically, allow Israel to kill endlessly if it claims it's trying to get quote unquote hostages. Um, and basically, what Kotler is doing is he's lamenting an end to the mass slaughter, pretty explicitly. And this again, this is a human rights. This is like, Elizabeth May and NDP people. They've been doing things with Kotler for years, but even recently, Alexandre Boulris, the pro-Palestinian NDP MP here in Montreal, called when these bogus claims of Iran trying to kill Kotler a few months ago. He said Kotler's a great Canadian or wonderful person or some variation of that. He said that to CBC. This is unbelievable. This is just a bloodthirsty maniac packaged as a human rights, whatever. It's just stunning to watch. Um, the CBC hosted at the offices in Toronto, they hosted a Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for media workers, anti-Semitism then and now training. And in this Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center training, they cite a retweet by Toronto Star's Shri Pradikar as an example of anti-Semitism, which of course it wasn't. They also cite the La Presse cartoon caricaturing Netanyahu as a vampire, which I know people there was division about this within independent voices, but to me, if anything, it's a slur against vampires, not a slur against Netanyahu, and certainly not Canadian Jewry. Um, uh, so this is what Friends of Simon Wiesenthal that are the CBC allows these trainings to basically by like pro-Palestinian comment by Shri Paradkar or the well-known cartoonist at La Presse. This is what is they're telling the media workers is anti-Semitism. The group, I think, Stop Arab Hate, the U.S.-based X account that highlights these crazy comments by different Zionists. They show this Afra Sixto, who was the owner of the Afra's Kitchen in Vancouver. And she says something to the effect of, in this video, she says, not all Palestinians are terrorists, but all terrorists are Palestinians. Something to that effect. Really dumb thing to say, but whatever. Clearly, she's deeply anti-Palestinian. But what stood out to me is that I recognize this name because in 2021, there was a caravan, a Palestinian caravan that went down Denman Street in Vancouver. And they apparently passed this restaurant. This Israeli uh, uh, restaurant, a Middle Eastern Israeli restaurant, um, and then Global News does this 2-minute clip with her and this story about basically she was targeted with anti-Semitism. And what it apparently happened is that this owner yelled something, basically some racist comment. I wrote about it at the time. I get the exact wording, but that this is how they act. These animals from the Middle East. This is how they act, kind of thing like that. And some person who was sitting at the cafe next door hears her say this and sort of confronts her. And then there's some like a couple people sort of confront her and they get into some sort of argument, whatever. And then the person writes a criticism of the restaurant online after. And then the owner goes and runs to the media and says, I've been the target of hate and anti-Semitism, blah, 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 blah. And they do it, and the global news goes along with it, and it becomes a story. It becomes even a national kind of story. Oh, another incident of Palestine solidarity, racism against Jews. and it was just a total, concocted by this owner who was themselves the racist. And this recent example just confirms more or less what was written, what I wrote, and what others, the Palestine Solidarity people in Vancouver, were saying 3 years ago. Um, so today is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Um, and Trudeau traveled to Poland. Uh, and, at this point, I don't think there's the Nazi Holocaust, and obviously what the Nazis did to European Jewry is, you know, horrendous beyond really imagination. And obviously not just targeting Jews, but principally, and all, more generally what the Nazis did to Russians and Ukrainians and Eastern European Slavic peoples and whatnot is stunning and horrible. But at this point, there's nothing progressive. There's nothing. In fact, it's regressive to talk about the Nazi Holocaust. Um, and Trudeau going to Poland, what I posted on his X account in response to him saying going, so why didn't you go? Why don't you go to Gaza to oppose a current Holocaust? And I think that's what it is. And now and like you don't even have to like some of the 80th anniversary stuff we're seeing out there is really clear. They're explicit. They connect it. So the Montreal Gazette published a piece titled "Never Again Must Be More Than a Refrain," and on Saturday, and it says in that piece says October 7th marked the largest massacre of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. In Israel, as in Poland 80 years earlier, and as throughout history, Jews were systematically targeted and murdered simply for being Jewish, right? That's what they're saying. Like, come on. Hamas, whatever, even if you believed the most outlandish things about what Hamas did on October 7th, to claim that they just did it because they were Jews is beyond ridiculous. Obviously, like you can blame Hamas, you can say Hamas is murderous, you can say they're rapists, you can say they're child baby beheading, whatever, all that, which are lies. You can make those claims, but the reason is not because they're Jewish. Come off of it. That's beyond ridiculous. And to like link that to what the Nazis did is just, I mean, obviously it's anti-Jewish. It's making a mockery of the notion of anti-Semitism. But most of the Nazi or the Holocaust industry stuff over the last few days is more sophisticated than that. This is just this crass, outrageous propaganda that is, it's a sign of how horrible the Montreal Gazette is that they would publish this, let alone that somebody would write this. Um, but you don't even have to say it because it's all in the aura, right? Even if you just talk about, like as Trudeau does, rising anti-Semitism, everyone knows what that's all about, what that's all like preparing the train for. That's all about like, oh, the anti-genocide people are all, anti-Jewish and they're just targeting the Jews. That's why they're protesting and blah, 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 blah. That's what the Nazi Holocaust is today. So as horrible as what happened to European Jewry was, the practical reality, and Finkelstein wrote about this 25 years ago, and we had Finkelstein on in a previous Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and it's just become that much more intense over the past 25 years, and then even more specifically over the past 16 months. Last night's The National had one thing right at the start, and then they had a long thing about the Shoah Foundation in University of Southern California and this initiative project they began years ago of a hologram of because most people who have any association with the Nazi Holocaust are of course dying or died, and so they were getting the testimonies years ago, getting the testimonies, and then this whole project, the holograms. Anyways, the point being here is that there's just tons and tons of attention given, and I'm sure tonight again, there'll probably be the top item. One of the top items is about the 80th anniversary and Trudeau going there and all this. And again, this is just um, the practical reality of this is enabling Israeli crimes. This is the practical reality. That's its cover. It's a way to undermine opposition, on and on and on. And oh, and the guy they had on the National last night calling for a mandatory Holocaust education across the country. They're saying that mandatory Holocaust education is more important than ever. Why? Why would it be more important than ever 80 years later? Like it was more important right away when they didn't want to talk about it because we had all kinds of ways in which we enable it because our prime minister at the time was fine with Hitler because, we didn't want Jewish refugees to come. It was far more important to have the education then than it is 80 years later. But this is the refrain. And the guy they have on, the National has on last night, I take his name. They just give a name. They don't say anything. So the guy was the former head of the Edmonton Jewish Federation. He's on the board of CJA. Um, you go to his Twitter account and he's the total anti-Palestinian, whatever, right? Like, it's clear what what the political aim is. I mean, just put it that way. I mean, it's framed as like, oh, we just need to remember for the sake of remembering, but it's underlay consistently with this justifies Israel. This is why people protest Israel, etc., etc. Um, so on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, my unfortunate conclusion is we shouldn't be talking about the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. That's just the political reality of 2025. As crazy as that sounds, in one level, that's just the reality. Uh, a couple other notes on Palestine before going to the main thing I want to talk about. Sarah Jama is not being allowed to run for NDP Ontario in Hamilton. There's a couple positive. The Queen's Medical School professor is under investigation after complaints of anti-Palestinian racism and doing all kinds of wild things this prof was doing, intimidating students and stuff like that. There's a joint letter by like 60 plus groups in Ontario calling for the dismantling of the hate crimes. Uh, I forgot the exact name of the group. It's sort of hate crimes unit, and which has basically been anti-Palestinian, and so they're calling for them to address anti-Palestinian racism. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is a couple of things about what this um, first of all, how the NDP needs to start getting clear in its fight against Trump, and how, I guess, at a bigger level, um, making the point, and I'm just writing a piece about this, as I'm just sort of flushing this out, that Canada has been, after the UK, probably the most important supporter of the US empire over the past 75 years. And now what we're seeing is, so in one sense, we've been feeding the beast for 75 years, and now the beast is turning on us, if you want to frame it like that. And I think it's sort of worth framing it like that. And but the ruling class's reaction to this, to Trump's sort of turning on Canada, is to just double down on feeding the beast, right? They just double down. And so you have this piece in the editorial in Saturday's Globe Mail. It's time for Canada to finally grow up. So it says, but the result is that Canada isn't meeting its obligations to NATO and to the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and is not doing anywhere near enough to protect the Arctic on behalf of its continental ally. When it comes to pitching in, Canada can barely bring itself to pile its dirty dishes in the sink, let alone help with the shopping and making dinner. A grown-up country doesn't shirk the responsibility of having a properly funded and manned military during peacetime. It makes the budgetary sacrifices required for it, which means going without other, more pleasant things. Okay? So, pretty clear cut. We have to cut uh, entitlements and social programs because we've got to put more money into the military. Trump, the Friday's Globe Mail headline was Trump calls on NATO members to spend 5% of GDP on defense. Okay, 5%. They're back to he's repeating the 5%. I haven't seen Jagmeet Singh respond to that, the 5%. The NDP position to the 5% calls from Trump must be anything over 2% of GDP, we call for Canada out of NATO. Okay, 2% is outrageous to spend 2% of GDP on the military. The NDP has to be pressed to say any talk, any move towards going beyond the 2% unleashes the response as well. If that's what we have to do to be in NATO, we don't want to be in NATO. Okay. There has to be some threshold at which the NDP responds, and any anti-warish minded, any whatever, that if you're going to push over a certain point, we we don't want to be part of you. Um, that has to be the response. But we haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen anything from Singh in response to the Trump's 5% GDP, which is a major threat to social programs. And in the note of this business of Canada needs to grow up, and so the chief of the defense staff, forgetting her name, Quebecoise woman, fairly new, she says in Le Devoir that so Le Devoir has a story with her on Saturday saying she brings up this whole 51st state, Trump's threats, 51st state, and they don't quote her, but they write saying these aren't the discours the expansionist discourse of the new president isn't what worries her. It's the changing geopolitical context. So she's explicitly saying that Trump's threats of annexation, that doesn't really worry me. What worries me is, of course, China and Russia, right? And this is, I mean, the notion that like Canadian, the a preeminent act of sovereignty or of growing up, if you want to frame it like that, one of the most clear-cut acts of sovereignty Canada could do is to defund the military, right? Contrary to there's a CTV thing again with the chief of the defense staff was saying we have to assert our sovereignty by fulfilling Washington and NATO's demands to hit 2% of GDP on the military. That's sovereignty is following Washington's order to increase military spending. No, the reality is sovereignty would be to slash military spending. In fact, move towards having no military. That would be genuine sovereignty. As much as that goes against the whole discourse, that's much closer to reality. And Trump continuing with his threats. Now, in this context, so today, Chrystia Freeland sends an email to her list saying the plan to step up to Trump. That's what she's framing to her list, okay? Her plan to step up to Trump. And in this thing, it says immediately convene an international summit and form an international coalition to coordinate a joint response to challenges to our sovereignty and our economies. We will start with a summit to be held the day Chrystia is sworn in as prime minister with the leaders of Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and the president of the European Union. Okay, so Freeland is calling for this coalition. Canada's going to lead a coalition to push back against Trump. Okay, now where is Jagmeet? So I'm writing this piece about, okay, has Jagmeet Singh said anything about Greenland, Trump's threats, Panama? Has he displayed any real solidarity with Mexico? Has he said anything about even the U.S. pulling out of the climate accord? Anything about Trump comments about cleansing Gaza? As far as I know, at least on his Twitter, no, he hasn't. Now, why wouldn't Singh see electoral, let alone being the right thing to do, electoral advantage to trying to pick a fight with Trump, trying to get Trump to denounce him, trying to get Elon Musk to denounce him? This seems like pretty straightforward to me. Even like Freeland, who was, when she was appointed foreign minister, that they said that it was an America, the U.S. embassy said it was an America first appointment, that she was going to adopt an America first foreign policy. She understands that, framing herself as taking on Trump is the way to, electoral advantage, whether it's true or not. that's what she sees as political aim or framing. But we're not seeing that from the NDP leader, which is I think a pretty stunning. And I think there's this coalition. I actually think there's I'm a little bit optimistic that Trump and in his whole saying the quiet part out loud and his kind of over the top and dumb often imperialism. Like when he says that we asked Egypt and Jordan to cleanse Gaza, to take out everyone from Gaza. When he says that, he's making it basically impossible for Egypt and Jordan to do that. You can't go out publicly and say that. I mean, it's basically every Palestinian opposes it, and almost everyone in Egypt and Jordan opposes it. You're just making it even more difficult. If you actually want to, just like if you want to actually take over the Panama Canal, you don't announce that. You come up with some pretext about human rights violations in Panama, or some justification for invading Panama, which lots of the American establishment will be fine with. They've done it before. You don't make some big announcement about we're taking the Panama Canal. So this is dumb imperialism. This is imperialism that makes puts all kinds of people all around the world, puts their back up, and and that includes here in Canada. And Jagmeet should have been doing this long ago. It was the right thing to do to call for an independent foreign policy. But it's even more of the right. More now, it's even more electorally beneficial to do that. Um, so I think there is a possibility of having this coalition develop of this sort of anti-genocide forces that have been unleashed over the past 16 months with people who are sort of outraged by the ugly American coming from Donald Trump, and a possibility of really building some force that's calling for independent Canadian foreign policy. Um, so that there's some positive. One final thing I just want to say that maybe we should have said a few minutes ago on this China thing and Canada's position on the China thing. It's I probably should have said this when I talked about increasing military spending, but the elite that are troubled by Trump, they call, okay, well, we got to put more money in the military because Trump said so and da da da. They've tried to frame their stuff in this China bashing. Okay, so Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who's in charge of the premiers right now, leading the leading the premier's response to Trump. He has a Wall Street Journal column or op-ed, and it's titled "Beat China with Fortress AmCan." Beat China with Fortress America Canada. Um, and he criticizes China, but like in the negotiation with Trump, part of the bargaining chip that we have, maybe one of the only main kind of or big picture bargaining, is okay, we can't trade with you. We're going to go to the other option. And China's the next biggest market for Canada. But the Canadian establishment's so far down the path of anti-China, the Americans have boxed us in so much, if you want to frame it like that, on this issue that they can't get out of it, right? So the only way they can respond to Trump's threats is by saying, "Hey, but we're such a good ally in fighting China with you. We should be deepening that alliance to fight China," and right. That's their reaction. Now, the Mexico, from my understanding, is they have I think they've gone somewhat down the path of turning on China, but China's part a little bit of their leverage against the U.S. Particularly with regards to the nearshoring that's gone on in Mexico. So it seems to me like it's a really bad bargaining position with the U.S. to basically bash your main potential alternative to U.S. As part of your bargaining with Trump to not be don't be hard on us. But again, the Canadian establishment is so far down the pro-U.S. empire perspective that they can't sort of break from that. Nonetheless, I do genuinely believe public opinion is turning anti-American very quickly, and maybe there is a possibility here with some of this energy that's been built up from the anti-genocide movement to merge with some of this, okay, Donald Trump, the ugly American, and maybe within that we can see something developing that's really positive. I'll leave it at that and comments and questions, and I'll make Laura a host. Go ahead, Yuri. I've
Thanks, Eve. Always a great program. My It's funny. I'm just uploading a two-part episode about the Liberal Party as an institution, and I know last week sometime you did a presentation about Canada's role in Africa, and I remember when I was getting into your work and decolonizing my mind on all things Canada. You said in one presentation about Canada's role in Africa that one one step is that the Conservative Party under Stephen Harper needs to be wiped out at the next election. And one time you said that, it got a round of applause. The same thing I think really needs to happen with the Liberal Party, but at the same time, it's such a depressing state of affairs where you have a party like the NDP that's supposed to be the third major party, that's supposed to be the workers' party, and so forth, and yet it's such a pathetic. How can I say? It's just so shocking how they're not seizing the momentum, and I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Because although I think the Liberal Party needs to be punished electorally, I know for a fact, like, Palestinians, Haiti, and so forth, humanity doesn't deserve Pierre Poilievre. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And another thing that I'm just shocked about is, I think one of the reasons why the NDP is being so pathetic. I mean, just look at how when Joe Biden was president and Jagmeet Singh was calling Joe Biden a working class hero, and he's supposed and like the NDP, like that's supposed to be like the Bernie Sanders party in Canada. So I'm just curious your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, I think the NDP has political space now to start pushing for an independent foreign policy and start talking about distancing ourselves from the US and stuff like that. I don't think that that's the foreign policy. That's not my preferred foreign policy, right? My like I don't like I think it's much more complicated than just the US makes us do everything bad and da da da. There's all kinds of there's political limitations to that framing. But there's also, political reality. And so I think that, progressive forces should be pushing that type of position, that type of framing, strategically, not blindly, but strategically. And I think, we did that with that action alert to Sing 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, whenever that was exactly. And I think that should be ratcheted up. And yeah, I mean, but I prefer the liberals to, I would prefer a Mark Carney liberals to a Pierre Poilievre. So that's, it's less bad is less bad. Yeah, but how all that plays out, I don't know. But yeah, there's um, different types of kind of interventions. This thing on Christopher Freeland that, I joined the Liberal Party to vote against Christopher Freeland. It was free. It's free to join, so why not take advantage of that opportunity to to defeat the worst of the neocons in the leadership race. Yeah. Anyways, but go
Go
ahead.
ahead, John. Sorry, John.
Thanks. Confirming you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple of things. The NDP is all over the map, but traditionally it's used support for the Atlantic consensus on foreign affairs, which is never a vote getter, to buy it some space to do things like the dental plan or other internal. I'm not defending it, but I'm saying that's the strategy. The question I would ask you is related to the military, the 2% of the GDP for military. Totally on board with an anti-imperialist military, but if we do go for an independent Canadian foreign policy, that has knock-on consequences in terms of commitments to the UN. Get out of NATO, but there's still commitments to the UN. A Coast Guard, search and rescue service, other elements of the military. And my reading is that actually neutral players tend to spend more on national defense. And I think I've mentioned this before. We have this vast continental shelf on that shared border with Russia, and having an active coast guard and defense of the natural resources to prevent poaching is not unreasonable. So I would rather phrase it as a anti-imperialist, but still necessary military.
I don't
Interested in your feedback.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think you can think of the Canadian military as I don't see that as this is the force that's been a completely imperialist. I mean, it begins as the British force, right? And there's no moment in which it's not structured to advance imperialism, be it British or American. So I think you'd have to eliminate the Canadian military and start again to imagine having something that would be considered anti-imperialist. So I repeat that every dollar that goes into the military is a boost to the U.S. empire, both because the Canadian military supports the U.S. military in so many ways, and because so many of the contractors, the arms contractors, are U.S. So I think practical example, Mexico spends half in actual dollars and percentage of GDP on its military as Canada. It trades with the U.S. The countries like Costa Rica don't have militaries. Doesn't mean you wouldn't have a Coast Guard. Doesn't even mean you wouldn't still have RCMP. You'd still have armed people. You'd still have the Sûreté de Québec. So yeah, I don't think that it's not structured to defend Canada. I mean, I don't think it's just it's so in your face in the recent weeks where Trump is talking about annexing Canada by economic force, and there's no one in the military they're explicitly saying, oh, we're not concerned about that. We're concerned about China. I mean, right? So to me, it's just it's flagrant, and it's in some sense, Trump becomes kind of almost helpful by exposing how obviously yeah. Now, do you need what in the north? I don't think that the distance between Russia and Canada in the north is incredible distance, right? In terms of I don't know. I don't think there's a danger of Russia coming in and taking from the north. I mean, if there's a danger, it's if there's a danger, it would be that if you had a government that was getting rid of the Canadian military, the U.S. would invade. That's the realistic. But
Yeah. So Eve, before we go on, I just want to let you know that I actually have to leave in a minute. So I want to let you know you've got Catherine Hughes, Gregory Gillis, Hans, and then Jake will all have their hands up. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So go ahead, Catherine, and I'll actually ask everyone on that. I'll get you to unmute.
So, hi, Eve, and thank you so much for everything this evening. I have and I'll just tell me if I'm making this too long, since there's quite a few people with questions. I'm interested in what you said about Rwanda and Congo. And I remember reading back a few years after the genocide of the Tutsis, Romeo Dallaire's book, Shake Hands with the Devil. And if I remember correctly, I think that he said at that time that he was quite cautious about supporting Kagame in any way because of the atrocities that his forces had been involved in. And then I did read an article, one of the articles that you suggested about the genocide against Hutus as well. But what I don't understand is how Kagame's forces shooting down the plane of the president of Rwanda, how that makes them responsible for what the genocidaires did. So that was the first thing.
Well, let's go with that because that's an important. The first point is that they invade. Okay, so they're the aggressor, right? In 1990, Uganda slash Kagame slash RPF invade. The bigger neighbor invades the smaller country. They displace much of the population. I think it's like 10%, a quarter of the country is displaced. Tons of people are killed. There's war. That's why the layer is there. He begins in 93, right? Because there's trying to come up with like a peace agreement and a electoral mechanism to deal with the issue. And Kagame it's an act of aggression, the invasion in 1990, but they do have some legitimate point, which was that they were exiled. They're the monarchy, the elite, basically the Tutsi elite, which is what Tutsi really essentially meant in close to the monarchy. As part of the decolonization process from 59 to 61, hundreds of thousands flee, largely to Uganda. And so they I don't think they have some rights in Rwanda. I don't think they have rights to come back as conquerors and to rule the country, but they do have some rights as Rwandans who have been exiled. So okay, so that's going on, but they know they can't. The aim is to have elections and but they can't win. They're never going to win the election. I mean, the Tutsi represent 9% of the country. There's no way they're ever going to win in any sort of electoral mechanism. So they know that. Kagame knows that. He knows he's hated by the vast majority of Rwandans. And so he knows that the country's a tinderbox. And so what happens is that in Burundi, you have the first ever elected government. The Hutu take power. So the Tutsi control the military. That's part of what they basically they're cattle herders, which is wealth, historically, and control the military. And so in Burundi, Hutus win election, and the Tutsi military overthrows the government, and hundreds of thousands huge numbers are displaced into Rwanda, and also I think it's hundreds of thousands are killed, certainly tens of thousands. Huge numbers are killed. Okay, so Rwanda is being invaded from Uganda. All kinds of Hutu are fleeing into Rwanda from Burundi because the Tutsi won't accept majority rule, and there's supposed to be an electoral process to end this fighting in Rwanda, and you blow up the plane of the whole Hutu political and military command, or much of the military command, and also the Burundian president as well. They knew exactly what was going to happen. What's the former head of the UN, Boutros Boutros-Ghali? He says explicitly, if it's the RPF that shot the plane down, the whole story gets flipped on its head. So yeah, you can make a case that under post World War II Nuremberg, that the act of aggression encompasses all of the following crimes, right? So you can make a case just by invading in 1990 that the RPF in Uganda are responsible. I wouldn't go all the way there, but I think that's worth at least considering that frame. And then they kill and kill and kill, displace and displace and displace. And then when there's an effort to international mechanism to end the conflict with some democracy that they know they can't succeed on. They blow up the plane of the Hutu leader and much of the military, and the whole thing disintegrates. And so the Rwandan genocide is not, there's nothing like if you compare what Israeli officials have said in their genocidal intent compared to Rwanda, it's like it's not even comparable. The record of like the planned genocide, it doesn't exist in Rwanda. There's almost nothing in terms of that. They actually got off in the tribunal, even the victor's justice at the in Arusha, they got off on the planned genocide element because it doesn't exist. What it was in large part, unfortunately, a sort of breakdown of social order and a popular genocide, if you want to call it that. And I mean, it's kind of horrible to say in a sense, but it's like it's just active aggression, long-standing refusal for an elite to allow the majority to rule, and you blow up their leadership, and things disintegrate. And also within that, the RPF was responsible for huge amounts of the killing, and there's all kinds of evidence that they actually the RPF infiltrated a lot of the different Interamwe kind of Hutu militia type stuff to stoke violence and to stoke instability, because that was what enabled and justified their capturing of power and taking Kigali and stuff like that. So yeah, and now Romeo Dallaire, you're right. His initial reaction, and Robin Philpott just details this in his book. Was it Ce n'est pas passé comme ça à Kigali or something? I forget the exact title of his book, but it didn't happen like that in Kigali. Or that it's sort of essence of the title, and he shows that early on, Dallaire is quoted in French media, basically saying more or less what I just said about what actually happened, and then with time, Dallaire's version of what happened just becomes more and more the kind of Kagame talking point, right? And he just takes it more and more and more and more. And even, it's gotten worse from when his book was published, was now, almost 20 years ago, and more down that path. So, yeah, and I've detailed this about, it's crazy. The African Union report on the 2000 African Union report on the Rwandan genocide was written in Toronto principally by a white Canadian, by the former Globe Mail guy there, Stephen Lewis's good friend. I forget his name now. Uh, Total supporter of Kagame. Anyways, forgetting his name. Anyways, I've written many stories about him, but yeah. So Canada's tied into this in so many different ways in terms of enabling Kagame. And again, Kagame is still publicly, he himself is still justifying their assault in Congo through the lens of the Rwandan genocide. This is still 31 years later, is making that claim, even though again many more people, and no one just denies that many more people have died in Congo than died in the 100 days of bloodletting in Rwanda. Yeah, so but I shouldn't go on too much longer, so maybe we could do Gregory, and can you try to be a little bit on the quick side, Greg and Hans and Jake?
Just a very quick question, Yves. With Chrystia Freeland, the way her launch was sort of disrupted by the Palestinian protests and the way the war is going in Ukraine, do you think this is going to sink any of her chances for the Liberal leadership?
I think it clearly hurt her big time. That was amazing disruption. My event in Toronto on Saturday, a bunch of the people who were involved in the disruption came. It was great talking to them. Totally wonderful disruption, both because it hurt her and it brought the issue out. I think we need to be doing that much more over the next month, going at her hard. I obviously sent out calling on people to join the Liberal Party to vote against Chrystia Freeland because of the Palestine question. I think that would be huge if we could in any way be perceived and to have and contribute to her losing because of Palestine. And that doesn't mean Mark Carney's going to be horrible, and so would any of the other people that would be the liberal, right? But I think Chrystia Freeland. It's also going at her on Palestine is a kind of a proxy for all her foreign policy, of course, right? Like the other issues are not as we have wide consensus on the Palestine question. We don't have a wide left consensus on Ukraine or even on Venezuela or the other issues that she really was, forefront of being a real neocon on. We do on Palestine, so that's also part of why to obviously put that front and center of what she's done on that issue. Even though, in fact, on Venezuela is probably the one where she was the most personally, the real kind of charge. And Ukraine's a bit, similar but a bit different. That's more of a long-term project than just as a foreign minister. But yeah, so I think that if we could contribute to her defeat by disrupting a few more of her events in the coming weeks and months, and also by people, voting against her, which practically will probably mean voting for Mark Carney, a big major banker or whatever, right? Not somebody that, but just a totally tactical intervention. Yeah.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Hans.
You mentioned the Maple article, Winning the Peace in Ukraine. In it, he refers to the right-hand man of Zelensky at the time of the Istanbul negotiations. His name is Alexei Arestovich, who has since fallen out with Zelensky. But he makes an interesting description in one of the interviews that's referred to in the article about the multinational, multi-ethnic character of Ukraine. But the message I wanted to convey, he actually admits that the champagne bottles were popped in the agreement that they had reached with the Russian delegation in March 2022, fully a month after the invasion. I think that's an important point to keep track of.
And Boris Johnson, and with the U.S. behind, sabotage it all. That's totally, right. Yeah, very important point. I mean, this was all the people that were like, this is the helping Ukraine people, right? This is helping destroy the place. And a lot of us were saying variations of this, but now, I mean, it's just becoming clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer that we have helped the Ukraine. I mean, this doesn't justify what Russia's done, but like we pushed them into a situation of destruction, and it's probably just going to keep getting worse for a while. Go ahead, Jake.
This guy, by the way, is slated to be running against Zelensky if they ever have a free election within the near term. Right now, he's scrunched up in New York someplace. If he survives to run in that election, we'll see.
Yeah.
Alexei Arestovich is the guy's name.
Go ahead, Jake.
Okay, this is in regard to Holocaust that keeps on going full steam ahead more than ever, 80 years later. About a week ago, there was a webinar with Gabor Mate and Naomi Klein. The topic was trauma. And it was extremely well done and well said and everything. But just to say one sentence from it, both of them said that when there is a trauma anywhere, then there is some psychologists and other people in the country as a whole trying to reconcile, trying to heal the people, to heal the whole atmosphere, and to bring down to better atmosphere and forgets mostly about it. Not to, I'm saying to forget about the Holocaust, but not to bring it up every day. They said, in the contrary, the Jewish lobby and Israel keep on every day pumping us with that trauma again and again and again in order to traumatize the people so they will cover up for the crimes of Israel, cover up for everything else that Jewish lobby doing to suppress everybody and so on. So basically, it's used basically to traumatize us and not let it calm down a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think it seems pretty self-evident that it's like it's really, I mean, it's sort of a form of psychological warfare against Canadian jury or U.S. jury and just like the constant bombardment that doesn't have almost anything to do with the day-to-day life, right? It like, I mean, I I don't think that like the my good friends growing up in East Vancouver, Michael Rosen and Dan Rosen, they didn't like weren't like facing anti-Semitism day to day or even month to month in daily life. But it's just like if in the hierarchy of racial hierarchy in Vancouver, like there were white people, there was there was racism being felt. It was being felt against Chinese Canadians, the Filipino Canadians. Even within the Chinese community, there's different forms of racism against people been, at my high school, whatever. Anyways, but you go like just like so, it's yeah, it's just self-evident at this point that it's being mobilized as a way to justify Israel and everything Israel does. And when the Montreal Gazette publishes a piece that connects what happened 80 years ago in Poland to what happened on October 7th is just, I mean, it's too crass. But I'm gonna leave it there because I'm past and I have some parental duties. Thanks everyone. Take care. Have a good night.